Hey guys, tonight we slip into the dim, flickering glow of a medieval forge, somewhere between the sweet aroma of freshly baked bread wafting in from the baker's next door and the unmistakable stench of burning hair from, well, let's just say you got too close to the fire earlier. You're standing there in a cramped little shop, the stone walls sweating with heat, a massive anvil waiting like an immovable mountain in the center. Outside, the cobblestone street hums faintly with distant chatter and the clop of horse hooves. Inside, it's just you, the tools, and a fire that eats wood faster than you can feed it. You probably won't survive this, at least not without a few blisters, a handful of burns, and a backache that would make a mule weep. But you've decided to give it a go anyway because there's something strangely hypnotic about this work. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you could drop a comment with your location and the local time right now. It's always fascinating to see where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pick up the hammer, heavy enough to make your wrist complain before you even swing. The handle is worn smooth from years of hands before yours, and for a second you wonder if any of them dropped it on their foot. You raise it over the glowing bar of iron resting on the anvil, and with a deep breath, you bring it down. The impact sends a ring through the air, sharp and almost musical, and a spray of sparks dances off the metal, tiny fireworks in the dark. The forge smells like burning pine and something metallic. Iron has a scent when it's hot, a sort of blood-like tang that clings to the back of your throat. You wipe sweat from your row with the back of your arm, but it doesn't help. The heat radiates in waves from the fire, and already your shirt is sticking to your back. You glance at the doorway, half hoping for a breeze, but it's just the shadow of a passing cat, tail up, probably on its way to steal fish from the market. It's strange to think that what you're doing now hasn't changed much in centuries. Historians still argue whether the blacksmith's role was more important than the carpenter's in a small village, but standing here, you can feel the weight of the job. You're not just shaping metal, you're shaping the tools, nails, hinges and weapons that everyone else depends on. Without you, doors don't swing, carts don't roll, and soldiers head to battle with sticks. And as noble as that might sound, it also means there's zero chance of anyone leaving you alone to nap. Your first few hammer strikes are clumsy, denting the iron in awkward spots, but you keep going. The rhythm starts to settle in, lift, drop, turn, lift, drop, and the ringing of metal on metal becomes almost meditative. You remember that one weird thing you overheard at the tavern. Some smiths used to spit on the iron for luck. You're not sure if that's true or if it was just an excuse for why there's mysterious sizzling coming from your work. Either way, you decide not to test it. The hammering sends a warm vibration up your arm, and you realize why apprentices always complain about sore shoulders. The blacksmith's life isn't just about strength, it's endurance, precision, and ignoring the fact that your hands now smell permanently like charcoal. You pause for a moment, resting the hammer against the anvil, and watch the fire. The coals shift and sigh, orange deepening to a molten yellow at the heart of the heat. You think about the bellows in the corner waiting to be pumped again, and you groan inwardly at the thought of more arm work. As the bar of iron cools, its glow fades from brilliant yellow to a dull red, and with it, the metal becomes stubborn, resisting your every strike. You'll have to reheat it soon, slipping it back into the heart of the forge until it's ready to cooperate again. The old smith who trained you once said, "Iron's like people. It only bends when it's hot." You're not sure if that's wisdom or a warning, but it's stuck with you. Another few blows and you realize you're working up a rhythm, not just with the hammer, but with the day itself. Morning heat, midday sweat, evening fatigue. You can almost feel your body sinking to the pace of the forge. You lean back, flexing your fingers, and let your eyes wander to the rack of tools hanging on the wall. Chisels, tongs, hammers of different weights, all waiting for the next task. Somewhere outside, a bell tolls the hour. and the sound carries in on the faintest of breezes. You can almost imagine the rest of the town moving around you. Bakers pulling bread from ovens, children chasing each other around the well, merchants yelling about the quality of their turnips. In here, though, it's just the crackle of the fire and the slow, steady heartbeat of the anvil under your hands. Your iron bar is almost shaped now, a crude start to what will be a simple hinge, not glamorous, but necessary. As you give it the final tap to straighten the edge, a stray spark lands on your wrist. You flinch, muttering under your breath, but you know this is just part of the job. In fact, most smiths carry a little constellation of tiny burn scars along their arms and hands. You're well on your way to earning yours. And as you place the finished piece to the side, you feel something odd. Pride. Not for the object itself, but for the moment you just lived through, the sound, the heat, the work. Tomorrow will bring another bar of iron, another swing of the hammer, another day in the glow of the forge. But for now, you take a slow breath, the air tasting faintly of ash, and let your shoulders drop. The forge hasn't cooled even slightly, and neither have you. Sweat runs down your temples like a slow leak, dripping into your eyes until you blink against the sting. You reach for another bar of iron, the rough, cold surface momentarily shocking after the heat of your last project. The contrast feels almost luxurious. You want to hold it a little longer just to savor the cool, but the fire is already roaring impatiently. You slide the bar into the coals, watching the edges begin to blur in the heat shimmer. The bellows are your next opponent. They creak with each pump, pushing hot breath into the flames until the yellow light blooms brighter, licking the metal. Your arms are already tired, and it's only mid-morning. You realize that this constant pumping is the quiet villain of a smith's life, the kind of work no one talks about but everyone feels in their shoulders by nightfall. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths spent more time hammering or simply tending the fire, but here's the truth you're living. Both are exhausting in their own special way, and the heat, oh, it doesn't just sit there. It finds you, crawls under your shirt, settles behind your knees. You lean into the bellows again, muttering something about how this job might be easier if you had the arms of a tournament champion. The iron shifts color from dull black to a deep, sullen red. You pull it from the fire with the tongs, gripping it just tightly enough to keep it from slipping, but not so tight that the jaws leave ugly marks. The hiss of metal meeting cooler air is strangely satisfying. You place it on the anvil, aim the hammer, and the first strike sends a burst of sparks toward your face. You flinch, but the hammer doesn't pause. Lift, drop, lift, drop. The sound is hypnotic. Outside, the world fades away. You could be anywhere in history right now, some nameless village, a bustling Kett town, or even working for a lord's army. Your only companions are the rhythm of your hammer, the glow of the metal, and the faint smell of roasted onions drifting in from somewhere nearby. You briefly imagine abandoning the forge to find those onions, but the iron on your anvil reminds you that it has a short window before it cools and resists your every effort. Your strikes begin to shape the piece, a long strip that will soon become a strap hinge. Not glamorous, but it has a certain dignity in its simplicity. You remember a quirky story you once heard. Some smiths supposedly made signature bends or hammer marks in their work so they could identify their pieces years later, a medieval autograph in iron. You glance down at your own slightly uneven surface and wonder if future generations will mistake it for a deliberate mark of craftsmanship instead of a rookie's learning curve. The heat from the iron radiates upward, warming your face as you bend slightly to check your progress. You tap along the length of the piece, straightening a slight curve, flattening a thick spot. Each adjustment feels like a conversation with the metal. Sometimes it cooperates, sometimes it stubbornly resists. The fire, too, feels like it's watching, waiting for you to admit defeat and bring the bar back for another round in the coals. Your hammer rhythm settles into something almost melodic. Lift, drop, slide, turn. The impact resonates through the floorboards, a dull vibration that you can feel in your knees. You wipe your face with your sleeve, but the sweat just replaces itself instantly, like the forge is personally offended by your attempt to cool down. Halfway through, the iron cools too much to work. Back into the fire it goes. You lean against the wall, letting your eyes rest for a moment on the dancing flames. They don't just burn, they pulse, shift and flare in ways that are almost alive. People in this time sometimes believe fire itself has a will, a personality, maybe even moods. And standing here, feeling its temperamental nature, you can almost believe it. When the iron's glow returns, you grip the tongs again, this time with a little more confidence. You set it on the anvil and begin the final shaping. The repetitive clang feels like an anchor, a steadying force in a world where most days are unpredictable. Somewhere in the back of your mind you realize this is why some smiths live into old age despite the labor. They find rhythm, and rhythm brings a kind of peace. The finished piece, slightly uneven but functional, rests on the cooling rack. You roll your shoulder, feeling the ache from hours of swinging, and give a little chuckle to yourself. One down, many more to go. As you glance at the forge, you notice the thin layer of black dust settling everywhere, on your clothes, in your hair, on the tools. It's a constant companion, this soot, the silent badge of your trade. You breathe in the mix of metal, ash and wood smoke and realize not for the first time that you will smell like this for the rest of the day, possibly forever. Your hands close around tools that feel like they've been waiting centuries for you, because in a way they have. You lift a hammer whose face is polished by generations of strikes, the wooden handle smoothed to an almost friendly curve. It's not fancy, it's not jeweled, it's a rock on a stick with ambition. But this is the monarch of the forge, the one that tells hot iron what to become and expects obedience, eventually. You weigh it in your palm, test the balance and feel your wrist make a tiny protest. Yes, you'll get stronger, or you'll develop a relationship with liniment and denial. On the rack, tongs hang like skinny steel birds, wolf jaw, flat bit, box jaw, each designed to hold a specific thickness or shape so the glowing iron doesn't rocket into the rafters. You pick up a pair and click them shut, listening to the dry metallic kiss. You don't squeeze too hard, you've already learned that lesson. Yesterday the tongs chewed a set of tooth marks into a hinge strap like a dog that mistook it for jerky. The anvil waits patient and heavy, its flat face for truing your work, its horn a curved promise for bending, and its step a ready ledge for quick cuts. You run your fingers along the edge and feel that gentle, purposeful radius, not sharp, not soft, just right for persuading corners into curves. That horn isn't for decoration, it's the essential geometry teacher you never had, showing you how arcs behave. A mainstream historical fact for your pocket. Across medieval Europe, charcoal-fired forges and anvil with horn setups were ubiquitous. A smith in England, France, or the Holy Roman Empire would recognize your toolkit at a glance. The shapes vary, the sizes change, but the language of hammer, anvil, and tongs is nearly universal. You're speaking it now, clumsy accent sure, but understandable enough that the iron gets the message. You glance at the hardy tools, chisels and fullers with square shanks that drop into the hardy hole like keys into a lock. The fuller rounds grooves for drawing out metal, the hot-cut chisel slices when the iron's soft as bread crust. There's a pritchel punch for knocking holes, though yours has seen better days and now looks like a tooth the town dentist, if you had one, would refuse to touch. You slot the hot cut into the anvil, test the fit, and nod to yourself. Good enough to keep the hammer face honest and your fingers attached. Fingers, by the way, are premium inventory. Try to keep the full set. Behind you, the quench tub waits with a lazy ripple. Today it's water. Sometimes it's brine if you need a quicker, meaner cool. And yes, there's that fringe tidbit you heard at market, the one where a farrier bragged about quenching a blade in stale ale for courage. You're skeptical. Quenching in beer sounds like a good way to ruin both the steel and the mood. Still, someone swears by it, just like that apprentice swore spitting on hot iron guaranteed luck. You're not starting an artisanal spit tempering trend today. You run a hand over the hammer faces. Cross peen, straight peen, rounding hammer for smooth persuasion, flatter for a tidy finish. Each tells the iron a slightly different story. The cross peen spreads metal sideways. The rounding face leaves gentle dimples you later chase away with the flatter. Historians still argue whether most village smiths in the Middle Ages routinely case-hardened their tools with carbon-rich materials at the forge or preferred to buy small amounts of ready-made steel from regional bloomery or finery operations. Either way, you know what your arm knows. A well-balanced hammer makes the day survivable. A bad one makes you consider a career in selling turnips. You study your tongs like a chess player studies a board. Pick the wrong pair and you'll be juggling an angry comet. The wolf jaw tongs promise to grip odd shapes. The flat bits promise discipline for square stock. You pick the wolf jaws, give them a couple of practice bites in the air. You look slightly ridiculous doing it, don't worry, everyone does, and decide you won't lose the bar today. Probably. You set them down and reach for the swage block, a hulking slab with hollows, V-grooves and half-rounds. It's a travelling landscape of shapes, a whole geography of curves waiting to be stamped into your work. You heave it closer, your spine sending a pointed note to management, which is also you. There's a comfort to these designs. They're old because they work. The days blur. Techniques pass from calloused hand to calloused hand, and somehow you're part of that chain, even if your contribution today is mostly sweat and small talk with the coal. The bellows give a patient wheeze, as if reminding you that air, not muscle, is the real partner here. A quick aside, because you're collecting facts like nails in a bucket. Charcoal was the standard fuel for European smiths, until coke began to take over centuries later. Your fire is exactly as medieval as your sore shoulders. See? That's one for the trivia pile the next time someone asks why you smell like a campfire. You lift the rounding hammer and practice a few ghost swings, aiming for the same spot on the anvil face every time. You're not just getting stronger, you're teaching your body to return to the exact swing path. Miss by a hair's breadth, and you leave a tiny crater in the iron. Repeat that all day, and your hinge looks like it lost a polite argument with hailstones. There's a half second when the hammer, the arc of your arm, and the anvil face align so precisely that the rebound springs the tool back toward you. Hat bounces your friend. Ride it and you work longer with less effort. Ignore it and you're essentially arm wrestling gravity until bedtime. Out comes a bar you want to draw into a rivet. You choose the crosspeen, angle the face, and start stretching the metal, working from the center outward like you're kneading dough that sizzles. A chip of scale breaks free and skitters across the floor with a sound like a beetle in boots. You aim, strike, rotate a quarter turn and repeat. The iron tells you when it's too cool. Your blows suddenly sound dull, like knocking on a full barrel instead of an empty one. Back to the coals it goes, and you turn to the wire brush, whisking rust and scale from the anvil face in a hiss of powder. You reach for a punch and inspect the tip. Ideally, it's crisp and slightly crowned to avoid sticking. Yours, after a week of honest abuse, looks more like a potato. You take it to the grinder stone, water trickling, and bring the shape back. Little sparks snapping like tiny warnings. Careful now. The stone sings in a low, tired key, matching your breath. When the tip is right, you test it on a scrap. Tap, turn, tap, listening for that clean ring that says you won't mushroom your punch on the first try. Quirky shop wisdom floats in with the chimney smoke. Don't put a hot tool on the wet floor unless you like that explosive pfft that startles you into inventing new words. Never lay a hammer face down in cinders unless you want it pitted like a moon. And always, always check that the hammer head is tight, because nothing spoils a quiet afternoon like watching it sail off mid-swing toward the baker's window. That's a joke, mostly. You're still not allowed near the sourdough. You test the hardy again, then glance at the anvil's horn. It's not polished for vanity. A bright horn means you've been bending cleanly, not gouging. You roll a strip around it, feeling how the radius changes as you slide from base to tip. The horn is the lesson in curves your school forgot to schedule. Gradients, leverage, spring back. You overbend a hair, knowing the metal will relax when it cools, like a stubborn door that only closes after you nudge it twice. All the while you're thinking about edges and surfaces. The flatter brings everything home, erasing the fingerprints of the peen. A good finish isn't about pride alone. It resists rust and makes the piece seat well against wood or stone. As the face kisses the iron, the ring in the shop sweetens. You grin despite yourself. Somewhere between the third and fourth swing, you found that little pocket of ease. Your hammer riding the rebound, your wrist relaxed, your stance easy. It's not glory, it's craft. And craft sneaks up on you in increments, like daybreak through shutters. One last oddment for the rumour shelf. You've heard of smiths who sharpen punches with a splash of vinegar, swearing it wakes the steel. Maybe it cleans scale, maybe it just smells impressive. Either way, you add it to your collection of maybe later experiments, right next to beer quenching and apprentice-approved lucky spit. For now, your toolkit, ancient, stubborn, familiar, does exactly what it has always done. It gives your hands the power to argue with hot iron and win politely. You start the morning not with a hammer in hand, but with a cart handle. The thing groans as you drag it over the rutted street toward the forge, its wooden wheels clunking with the grace of a limping mule. The cart's weight isn't from anything glamorous, no treasure chests or exotic spices, but from raw iron. Chunks of it dull and heavy, each piece demanding you acknowledge its existence by how it pulls at your shoulders. You know this load too well. It's the kind of cargo that makes you wish the village had invented a proper pulley system, or at least hired a few oxen with gym memberships. You glance down at the iron bars, each one like a frozen shadow, black, cold, and stubborn. They came from a bloomery miles away, where ore is smelted down with charcoal into something you can actually work. The journey from ore to workable iron is long and messy, but that's someone else's problem. Your problem is that these bars at this moment feel heavier than the moral baggage of the town gossip. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths in smaller towns had regular, reliable access to good quality iron, or whether they were constantly improvising with whatever came through the gate. Some records suggest steady trade routes, others point to frequent shortages. You don't need a scholarly debate. You can tell the quality just by lifting it. This batch is decent, solid, not crumbly, and with a faint metallic sheen when you catch it in the light. Still, it's no feather pillow. You turn into the forge's yard, the cartwheels jarring over the threshold stone. The familiar smell hits you instantly, charcoal, old sweat, and the faint tang of iron oxide. You roll your eyes, partly because you know you'll carry that smell home with you tonight, and partly because you can already hear the forge's fire whispering for fuel and metal. Your first task is unloading. No apprentice today. Why? Or it. Each bar you lift pulls a grunt from you, and you stack them near the wall, careful to keep them off the damp ground. Moisture is an enemy here, creeping in to form rust before you've even had the chance to shape the stuff. You've seen smiths cover their iron with oiled cloths or animal hides to keep the damp out. You, being in the middle of your career rather than the top, use a patched bit of tarp that looks like it's seen as many battles as the Lord's Guard. Once the iron is stacked, you can't help but think about its value. A bar of iron in this era can be worth a startling amount, sometimes the equivalent of weeks of labor for a farmhand. In certain towns, the price could even rival that of a good horse. You run your fingers along one piece, feeling its grainy surface. It's a reminder that every strike you make on the anvil has real stakes. Waste too much and you're throwing away more than metal. You're throwing away someone's wages, someone's chance to buy bread for a week. The forge fire is hungry, but you can't just toss iron into it like wood into a campfire. You need to heat it slowly, evenly, coaxing it toward the colors that tell you it's ready to work. Dull red is stubborn, bright orange is willing, and yellow-white is so eager it risks burning away your hard work. You've heard of smiths who sing to the fire to keep time with the heating, the rhythm telling them when to turn or shift the metal. A quirky little superstition maybe, but you find yourself humming a little tune all the same. Before you start heating, you do a bit of triage, deciding which bars are for immediate projects, which will be stored for later, and which are best for repair jobs. The logic isn't complicated. The straight, clean bars are for new work. The oddly shaped, slightly pitted ones are perfect for melting down into nails, straps, or patch pieces. Waste not, want not. Especially when your customer is a farmer who will happily pay in bread and cider if you keep his ploughshare in working order. You grab a short, thick piece of iron, a future hammerhead if all goes well, and carry it to the anvil. Even cold, it has a sort of presence. It's heavy for its size, and when you set it down, it makes a sound that seems to settle into the forge's bones. This is the kind of work that will take multiple heats, careful shaping, and probably a few muttered words when it doesn't go as planned. Historians still debate whether medieval smiths produced most of their own tools or relied on trade with larger workshops. In your experience, the answer is both. You make what you can, especially if it breaks mid-season. But if there's a master smith 2 towns over with a reputation for perfect hammer faces, you'll trade for one without shame. Your pride doesn't keep the work moving. Your tools do. The bar destined to become nails is next. You measure it with your eye, then mark it with a chalk line. You'll cut it into manageable lengths before heating because handling a long, unwieldy bar in the fire is a bit like dancing with a drunk bear, dangerous, unpredictable and sweaty. You secure it in the vise, its jaws biting just enough to hold without crushing. A few hacks with the chisel, a few satisfying metallic thunks, and you have shorter pieces ready for the forge. There's a fringe tidbit you've heard. Some smiths used to bless the first iron heated on a Monday morning to bring good luck for the week. Not a formal prayer, just a quiet moment where they'd tap the bar 3 times on the anvil before starting. You've tried it once or twice, not that you're superstitious, you tell yourself, but those weeks did seem to go more smoothly. Today, you give the bar 3 quick taps anyway. Can't hurt. The fire's heat swells as you stoke it with fresh charcoal. You can feel it kissing your face, the warmth quickly turning to a full-on shove. The bar in the coals shifts from dull to glow, eyeing, and you pull it out with the tongs, careful not to let your grip slip. It hisses faintly, the sound blending with the crackle of the fire. You set it on the anvil and strike, once, twice, 3 times, flattening the end into a taper for the first nail point. It's repetitive work, but there's something meditative about it. Lift, drop, rotate, repeat. Your mind wanders to the market where these nails will end up, holding together someone's roof beams, mending a wagon, or maybe fastening a door that keeps out the night wind. Small things, but without them, the big things fall apart. When the metal cools to a stubborn red, you slide it back into the fire. This back and forth, heat, strike, reheat, is the heartbeat of your day. It's why your legs ache from standing, why your arms feel like you've been wrestling oxen, and why your clothes are a patchwork of sweat stains and ash smudges. But it's also why the forge feels like home. You lean on the tongs for a moment, watching the iron drink in the fire's heat. Outside, a cart rattles by and you hear a child laugh, a clear, quick sound that feels almost out of place against the heavy rhythm of your work. Inside, the forge breathes in time with you. The fire roars, the iron glows, the hammer waits, and the stack of raw bars against the wall reminds you there's still a whole day ahead, full of weight, heat, and the slow magic of turning stubborn metal into something useful. The forge exhales a lazy plume of heat, and the bellows stand there in the corner like some medieval gym machine you never asked for. You glance at them with the sort of dread usually reserved for seeing the laundry pile after a long week. Still, without those great leather lungs, your fire wouldn't breathe, and without the fire, you're just a person in a hot room holding expensive metal sticks. You take the handles, feeling the stiffness in the leather from yesterday's work. A push, a pull, and the bellows creak like an old man getting out of bed. The nozzle huffs into the fire and the flames perk up instantly, licking higher, yellow sliding into bright orange. That sound, the soft, hungry roar, always makes you feel like you've just fed some strange, loyal beast. You keep a rhythm, pull, push, pull, push. Your forearms start that familiar ache, but there's no shortcut here. There's an old saying among smiths that if your bellows arm isn't tired, your fire's not hot enough. You suspect it's just a sneaky way to make apprentices do extra work. Historians still argue whether village smiths always pumped their own bellows or had dedicated helpers, often young boys paid in bread and the occasional coin. You're doing both jobs, which means you're burning energy before you even lift the hammer. The forge's bed of charcoal glows brighter under your efforts, each ember holding a tiny sun. You slide in the next bar, angling it so the heat wraps around it evenly. The bellows hiss and sigh, the flames snapping playfully at the edges of the iron. You've learned the hard way that uneven heating is the quickest route to warped work, and nothing ruins your mood like spending twice the time fixing something you could have avoided. As you pump the bellows, your mind drifts. The rhythm is hypnotic, and you imagine, just for a moment, that you're stoking the heart of the whole large. In a way, you are. Without the heat, no nails get forged, no horseshoes get shaped, no tools get repaired. The forge's warmth bleeds into the air, drifting out to the street where a passerby might pause just long enough to feel it and move on, never knowing you're in here wrestling with leather, wood, and fire. There's a fringe tidbit you once overheard from a travelling smith. Some claimed they could read a fire by smell alone, telling whether the heat was right for nails, knives, or hinges without even looking. You're not quite there yet, but you swear the fire smells different at its hottest, a sharper, cleaner scent of burning charcoal mixed with the faint metallic tang of the iron beginning to wake. The iron bar starts to glow, that deep, rich red that tells you it's ready for persuasion. You set the bellows aside, shaking the ache from your arms, and grip the tongs. The moment you pull the bar from the coals, you feel the fire's absence in your hands, like stepping away from a loud crowd into quiet. The bar hisses faintly in the open air, light bouncing off its surface as you carry it to the anvil. Hammer in hand, you give the first strike. Sparks spray out in a quick burst, tiny stars fading before they hit the ground. The metal yields under your blows, stretching, flattening, becoming something new, but you can already feel it cooling. That's the constant push and pull here. Heat it enough to work, but not so much that it burns. Shape it quickly before the heat slips away. Back into the fire it goes. You turn to the bellows again, sighing like you're about to lift a full barrel. Pull, push, pull, push. The leather flexes, the wood creaks, and the flames swell like applause. The fire seems almost smug about it. Yes, keep working, keep feeding me. You glance at the wall where a row of bellows tools hangs, small iron hooks for maintenance, scraps of hide for patching leaks. A tear in the bellows can ruin your day faster than a spoiled batch of dough at the bakery. You've patched yours twice this year already. Some smiths wrap extra leather around the stress points, but you've found that a careful hand and steady rhythm are your best protection. The second heating goes faster. You slide the bar in just so, pump the bellows until the edges brighten, then pull it out and return to the anvil. The work feels smoother now, your strikes finding their pace. Lift, drop, rotate. The ringing of the anvil mixes with the fading crackle of the coals, a sound that somehow makes the long hours feel shorter. There's another odd belief you've heard. Never pump the bellows in absolute silence. Supposedly, the fire gets lonely and burns unevenly. Silly, but you catch yourself humming again. Not a tune anyone would recognize, just something to keep the time, a heartbeat for the work. Maybe there's something to it after all. By the time you finish shaping the piece, your shoulders are heavy, your palms ache, and your shirt feels like you've been wearing it in a sauna. You lean against the bellows frame, catching your breath. Outside, the afternoon sun cuts sharp angles across the doorway, but in here, the light belongs to the forge. The fire waits, still hungry, and you know you'll be back at the bellows before long. For now, you set down the tongs, roll your wrists and flex your fingers. The work is endless, but so is the satisfaction. One more piece forge. One more proof that with enough heat, rhythm and stubbornness, you can turn raw metal into something that will outlast you. The day edges into late afternoon, and the forge door is propped open to let in a thin breath of cooler air. It does little against the heat pooling inside, but it means the steady parade of villagers can step in without feeling like they've opened an oven. And sure enough, here comes the first one. Old Marta from down the street, a basket of eggs in one arm and a horseshoe in the other. Needs fixing, she says, as if the bent metal in her hand isn't already confessing its sins. You take it with your tongs and give it a quick glance, warped from uneven wear, nail holes stretched from months of pounding hooves. This is the kind of work you can do in your sleep, though not without a little effort. You set it aside for a moment and return to the job already cooling on your anvil. Nails, rows of them, each one no bigger than your finger, stacked in a neat cluster like soldiers waiting for orders. This is the bread and butter work for any smith in a town like this. Small items, made in bulk, always in demand. And yes, it's monotonous, but you've long learned to use that repetition to let your mind wander. The horseshoe can wait until the nails are done. The fire is still hot from your last run at the bellows, so you grab the next nail rod with the tongs and set it in place. The hammer falls in that familiar cadence, point the end, cut it to length, shape the head, over and over. The sharp ting as you finish each head almost feels like punctuation. Historians still argue whether most village smiths actually made every nail themselves or bought them in bulk from larger urban shops. In truth, you suspect it depended entirely on who had the time and who had the patience. You? Today you have both, though the patience is running thin. A quirky tidbit you picked up from a travelling peddler. Some folks claimed nails made during a waxing moon held better luck in building, while those made during a waning moon were better for coffins. You don't ask too many questions about the second part, but you keep it in mind, not because you believe it, of course, but because the villagers do, and that can mean the difference between a smooth sail and a wary glance. When the last nail clinks into the bucket, you wipe your brow and turn your attention to Marta's horseshoe. It's been years since you last shod a horse yourself, but the repair work is straightforward enough. Into the coals it goes, and the bellows get another round of pumping. You can hear Marta chatting outside with someone, probably sharing the latest news about the baker's apprentice and that incident with the barrel of ale. The shoe heats quickly, the bent metal relaxing into a malleable glow. You set it on the anvil, horn side up, and begin tapping it back into shape. The hammer's rhythm changes here, more curved blows, following the arc of the horn, coaxing rather than flattening. You check the nail holes, reshaping them with a pritchel punch where needed, making sure they'll grip the hoof without splitting it. There's a moment where the smell shifts, a faint, sweet note beneath the charcoal tang. That's the iron cooling, giving up its heat in soft waves. You dunk it in the quench tub, the hiss filling the shop like applause. When you pull it out, the metal is dark and smooth, ready for another few months of service. You hand it back to Marta, who trades you the basket of eggs and a grateful nod before disappearing down the lane. With her gone, the shop is quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of the rafters. You let the quiet settle, leaning against the anvil for a moment. The light outside is shifting. Golden now, softer. Market chatter drifts in. Bits of gossip, laughter, and the sound of a lute being plucked somewhere nearby. You think about the flow of the day. Morning is for heavy work when your energy is fresh. Afternoon is for smaller projects, repairs, and the steady trickle of townsfolk who need something mended. That rhythm keeps you from burning out too early, or at least it's supposed to. Some days it's just enough to keep you from collapsing face first into the quench tub. You grab another small project from the workbench, a hinge that's warped slightly from years of holding up a door too heavy for its frame. It's the kind of job that requires patience and a light touch, and you can't help but smirk. Patience, in a forge, is really just code for spend more time with the bellows. The hinge goes into the coals, and you give the fire a few gentle breaths with the bellows. The glow deepens, the air around the forge shimmers, and the metal begins to soften. You bring it to the anvil and start to true the edges, tapping just enough to realign without thinning it too much. The rhythm is slower here. Tap, check, tap, adjust. You've seen smiths ruin a perfectly good hinge by rushing, turning a gentle bend into an awkward kink that never quite works again. By the time you're done, the sun has dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the shop floor. You set the hinge aside, satisfied, and glance at the fire. It's still strong, but you know the day's end is creeping closer. Soon, you'll let it burn down to embers, banking it so you can coax it back to life tomorrow without starting from scratch. For now, though, there's still enough time for one more small piece. You pick up a length of scrap and turn it in your hand, imagining what it might become. A hook, maybe, or a latch. Something simple. Something that will find its way into someone's home without fanfare. You feed the fire one last time and smile to yourself. The day has been a blur of nails, horseshoes, gossip, and quiet mow. Ments at the anvil. Nothing grand, nothing for the history books, but without days like this, the village doesn't run. And without the forge, well, the village might just fall apart at the hinges. You roll your shoulders and stretch your neck, feeling the satisfying pop of a long day's labor settling into your muscles. In the dimming light, the forge feels more intimate now. The fire's glow sharper against the deepening shadows. You're working on something different this evening. Armor. Not the gleaming, romantic kind from minstrel songs, but the practical workaday kind for the Lord's men. Breastplates, gauntlets, bits of chain. These pieces don't sparkle, but they stop arrows, and that's more useful than any ballad. The order came a week ago, urgent enough that the messenger barely stayed long enough to sip water before heading back. Apparently, the guard's equipment has taken a beating, and replacements are needed before the next patrol cycle. You set a curved sheet of iron on the anvil, its cold surface already whispering about how much hammering it will take to shape. Historians still argue whether most medieval armor in smaller villages was made locally or bought from specialist workshops in larger towns. From your perspective, the truth is simple. If the Lord wants it now, you make it here, no matter how much your back protests. Armor is a different beast from nails or horseshoes. It demands larger stock, wider swings, and more patience than your shoulders care to give. You start with the heat. The bellows groan under your hands, and the flames rise eagerly. The sheet slides into the fire, disappearing beneath a glowing bed of charcoal. You keep the bellows pumping, coaxing the metal toward that sweet orange yellow where it's willing to move under the hammer without cracking. When it's ready, you drag it onto the anvil, gripping it with tongs wide enough to hold the plate steady. The first blows are broad, heavy, spreading the metal outward in slow, ringing waves. Sparks dance off into the darkness, and you find yourself leaning into each strike, feeling the vibrations shiver up your arms. This isn't delicate work, it's persuasion by brute force, the kind that leaves your ears ringing long after the hammer's quiet. Somewhere between the 10th and 15th strike, you remember a quirky tidbit you once overheard from a traveling soldier. Some guards believed dents in their armor carried the luck of the battle they'd survived. They'd keep certain pieces, battered but functional, claiming the metal remembered how to protect them. You're not sure whether it's superstition or a strange kind of sentimentality, but you've seen men refuse brand new gear in favor of their old, scarred breastplates. The heat fades quickly in a piece this large. You stop, tongs in hand, and slide it back into the fire. This cycle will repeat over and over. Heat, hammer, check the curve, reheat. The curve is everything. It needs to deflect, not absorb, a blow. Too flat and the force will hit like a fist to the chest. Too steep and it'll pinch or dig into the wearer's body. You work slowly, adjusting with careful strikes along the edges, coaxing the metal into a smooth dome. The firelight throws strange shapes on the walls, shadows of your swinging arms, the curved plate, the flare of sparks. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the polished side of the breastplate in progress, distorted but clear enough to see the sweat streaking your face. You look, frankly, like someone who's been arguing with a stubborn piece of earth for the better part of an hour. You pause to rest your wrists, setting the plate against the anvil's horn for the next round. This is where finesse starts to matter. The horn's curve helps you smooth the belly of the plate, blending hammer marks into graceful arcs. The ringing is sharper here, the metal vibrating in a way that almost hums. You fall into a rhythm, tap, slide, tap, rotate, and for a moment it's almost meditative. But the weight is catching up to you. Your forearms burn, your shoulders ache, and there's that familiar tightness in your lower back that warns you not to push too far. You remind yourself of another smith's wisdom. Armor will still be here tomorrow. You won't if you break yourself today. You grin at the memory, mostly because you've ignored that advice plenty of times before. By the third reheating, the plate is starting to resemble its final form. You quench it lightly, enough to cool it for inspection, but not so much that you harden it prematurely. Running your hand over the surface, you feel the faint ridges left by your hammer. Some will stay, function over vanity, but you'll take a flatter to the worst of them later. This piece isn't meant to win beauty contests, it's meant to stop a blade. The shop smells different now, the iron's heat mingling with the sharper tang of worked steel. Outside, the village has gone quieter, the market stalls packing up, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. You're aware, distantly, of the simple fact that while the world outside is winding down, your forge feels timeless, unchanged in its purpose for hundreds of years. You set the plate aside, propped against the wall, and reach for the next piece, a gauntlet cuff, smaller, lighter, but no less demanding. The work will carry you into the night, each finished piece adding to the pile that will arm a man you may never meet. And though the songs may never mention you, the clang of your hammer is as much a part of his survival as the sword in his hand. You know you're not the master of the forge, not yet. You're the one who runs when the master shouts, who sweeps up the scale after the last job of the night, who scrubs soot from tools until your fingers ache. You're the apprentice, and the forge has a way of reminding you exactly where you stand. It starts before dawn. While the master still sleeps, you're here, stacking wood for kindling and laying out the charcoal. The forge is cold, a dark mouth waiting for breath. You pump the bellows in short bursts to coax the first reluctant flames, feeding them like you would a nervous stray animal. Soon the heat blooms and the master arrives, nodding as if this is the least you should be capable of. Historians still argue whether medieval apprenticeships were harsher in rural villages than in big cities, but you're living proof that harsh doesn't really change. You're paid in lessons and the occasional hot meal, sometimes in gruff praise, which might be worth more than the coin. And then there are the pranks. The older journeyman has made it his personal mission to keep you sharp. Yesterday he swapped your regular tongs with a pair whose jaws don't quite meet. You didn't notice until your glowing iron slipped out and nearly branded your boot. Another time he left a dead mouse in the quench tub, nothing like a sudden puff of boiled rodent to make you question your career choices. You don't complain. Complaining just earns you more chores. So you keep your head down and your eyes open, because the forge is a place where distraction costs you skin. You've already learned the hard way that brushing past the anvil while the master's mid-swing is a mistake you only make once. The bruise on your hips still tells the story. Today's first real job is cleaning yesterday's chaos. The anvil face is covered in flecks of cooled scale, little shards of iron oxide that pop off during forging. You take the wire brush to it, scraping until the surface gleams dully. The hammers go back on their hooks, heavy heads thunking against the wall. You run a rag over the tongs, checking the pivot rivets for play. If they're loose, they'll twist in your hand at the worst possible moment. The master hands you a small job, a batch of rivets. They're the apprentice's bread and butter. Small, repetitive, easy enough to do without too much guidance, but precise enough to teach you control. You measure out short lengths of rod, heat them until they glow, then hammer one end into a neat dome. You imagine these rivets holding together a door, a chest, maybe even a suit of armor. They may be small, but without them, nothing stays in place. There's a quirky tidbit you overheard from a traveling tinkerer who stopped by last month. Some old smiths used to keep a first rivet from every large job as a sort of talisman. They'd hang them on a cord in the forge for luck. You glance at your growing pile and wonder if it's worth starting your own collection. The master would probably call it nonsense, but you've seen him keep the odd scrap just in case. Halfway through the batch, the journeyman wanders over with a smirk. "You missed a spot," he says, pointing to a rivet that's ever so slightly lopsided. "You know what this means. Redo it." He doesn't have to tell you twice. You toss it back into the fire, the flames licking at it until it's ready for another round under the hammer. The second time, it comes out perfect, and he gives you a short nod before walking away. It's not much, but you'll take it. The rest of the day is a mix of errands and grunt work. You run to the tannery for strips of leather to repair a bellows hinge. You haul buckets of water from the well to fill the quench tub. You sort through the scrap pile, separating pieces that can be reforged from those destined for the smelter. It's not glamorous, but you're learning how to read the fire's mood, how to angle a hammer so it does the work for you, how to keep your hands safe when everything in the room is trying to burn, crush, or cut you. By evening, your shirt is streaked with soot, your hair smells like charcoal, and your forearms feel like they've been beaten from the inside out. The master looks over your work and gives a grunt that might be approval. The journeyman flicks a bit of scale off your shoulder and mutters, "Not bad, greenhorn." You catch yourself smiling because in the forge, that's as good as a standing ovation. You sweep the floor one last time, the soft scratch of the broom against stone almost soothing after a day of clanging metal. Outside, the village is settling down for the night, the smell of cooking fires drifting in on the cool air. You close the forge door, banking the coals so they'll be ready to wake again in the morning. It's not an easy life. It's blistered hands and heavy lifting, long hours and little rest, but each day you get a little better, a little faster, a little more a part of the forge's heartbeat. And someday, when the master's gone and the journeyman's moved on, you'll be the one teaching some wide-eyed apprentice how to survive the heat. Market day starts before the sun's even thought about waking up. The roosters are still practicing their warm-ups when you're already stacking the cart. Hooks, hinges, nails, horseshoes, a few repaired tools, anything you think will catch someone's eye or loosen their purse strings. You wrap the sharper pieces in cloth to keep them from jostling into each other, though the clang of iron still rings out every time you hit a bump in the road. The cart's wooden wheels creak along the cobblestones, and you feel every jolt through the handle. The streets smell different this early. Damp stone, stale beer from last night's tavern crowd, and a faint sweetness from the bakery's first loaves. You pass the baker's apprentice sweeping crumbs out the door. He gives you a nod and a, "Don't let the thieves nick your nails this time," which you'd laugh at if it hadn't actually happened once. By the time you reach the square, the market is already humming. Cloth merchants are setting out bolts of rough linen and dyed wool. Fishmongers shout about the freshness of their catch, their stalls smelling like the sea collided with a bucket of salt. The air's alive with the mix of animals, people, and more smells than you can politely name. You find your usual spot, between the cooper who sells barrels and the old woman who sells onions strong enough to make a grown soldier weep, and start laying out your wares. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths in smaller towns actually sold their goods themselves or sent apprentices, but you know firsthand that showing up in person gets better results. People like to talk to the person who made the thing, to ask questions, to haggle, until both of you are pretending you got the better deal. And sometimes, being there in person means you hear gossip before anyone else. Gossip you can trade for coin or favours later. Your first customer is a farmer with a ploughshare in need of repair. He eyes your hinges, asks a few questions, and finally decides on a set for his barn door. You wrap them in a scrap of cloth, take his coins, and slip them into the little pouch at your belt. The next is a travelling merchant who wants a handful of nails. He pays with a coin from somewhere far away, round, thick, and stamped with a crest you don't recognise. You'll have to ask the tavern keeper about it later. He collects strange currency like other men collect hunting trophies. There's a quirky tidbit you've noticed about market day. Certain customers always buy at the same time. The tanner's boy shows up right after the church bell rings the first hour, buying a new awl every few months. The miller's wife comes just before noon, picking up small hooks she insists are for kitchen work, but are definitely used to hang fish in the smokehouse. Knowing these patterns lets you prepare, and being prepared means less fumbling and more sales. The haggling is as much a performance as a transaction. An old man insists your nails are too expensive, waving his hands like you've just tried to sell him gold-plated turnips. You lower the price by a sliver, he counters with a sigh, and eventually you meet in the middle. He walks away, pretending he's won. You pocket the coins, pretending you've won, and both of you are telling the truth in your own way. Of course, the market also attracts its share of trouble. Midday, you catch a boy's hand slipping toward your pouch. Without thinking, you drop the hammer you were holding. It lands with a heavy thunk just inches from his toes. His eyes go wide and he bolts into the crowd. You pick up the hammer, muttering something about how you should start charging extra for close calls with disaster. As the day goes on, the square grows louder, hotter, and busier. The sun climbs high, baking the cobblestones until the air shimmers. You keep a small jug of water under the cart, sneaking sips between customers. The clang of coins in your pouch is a good sound, but it's not the only measure of success. Sometimes a promise of future work is worth just as much. The leather worker stops by to ask if you can make a special tool for cutting straps. You agree, knowing his friendship will bring you other customers. By late afternoon, the crowd begins to thin. Merchants pack up their goods, children chase each other between the stalls, and a lone lute player strums for the few stragglers still wandering the square. You count your coins, more than last week, which is always a relief, a few copper bits, some silver, and that strange foreign coin still glinting in the mix. The walk back to the forge is slower, the cart heavier in a way that has nothing to do with weight. You're carrying the day's stories as much as its earnings, the gossip about the miller's new apprentice, the rumor of a bandit sighting on the road south, the satisfaction of seeing your work go out into the world in other people's hands. When you reach the forge, you stash the unsold goods, bank the fire, and finally, let yourself sit down. Market day is over, and your legs are telling you in no uncertain terms that they'd like to stay still for at least a week. But you know that come next market day, you'll be out there again, cart creaking, hammer ready, waiting to trade iron for coin and a little piece of village life. The knock at your door is not polite, it's the sharp, impatient kind that tells you the person on the other side isn't here for a friendly chat. You wipe the charcoal dust from your hands and open it to find one of the Lord's guards standing there, armor dull from use, a grim set to his jaw. Behind him, a cart waits with a pile of battered weapons, spears with bent tips, swords with chipped edges, and shields dented like they've been in a dance with a boulder. "Lord needs them ready by tomorrow," the guard says, his tone making it sound less like a request and more like a warning. You nod, already feeling the weight of the night ahead settle on your shoulders. As soon as the cart rattles away, you start unloading. Each piece tells a story. Nicks from a blade, dents from a mace, bends that speak of a hard block gone wrong. Historians still argue whether village smiths produced weapons regularly or only handled repairs between shipments from larger armories, but tonight you're reminded how urgent and personal this work can be. These aren't ceremonial pieces, they're tools of survival, and their owners are expecting them back in fighting shape before the next sun rises. You start with the swords. The first is a short blade, its edge chipped in 3 places. Into the coals it goes, resting just long enough to ease the metal's stiffness. You pump the bellows in quick bursts, coaxing the color you want, orange, bright, but not too hot. With the sword secure on the anvil, you begin working the edge, hammering the chips back into line before taking it to the grindstone. The steady scrape of steel on stone fills the forge, accompanied by the hiss of water you pour on the blade to keep it cool. There's a fringe tidbit you once heard from a wandering soldier. Some swear by quenching a blade in horse urine to make it bite harder. You've never tried it, mostly because you're not keen on keeping a bucket of that in the shop, but you file it away in the mental cabinet labeled maybe, but probably not. The second sword is trickier. Its tang, the hidden part that extends into the handle, is cracked. That means disassembling it, reforging the tang, and resetting the hilt. It's the kind of repair you'd rather take your time with, but tonight there's no luxury for that. You work fast, heating, hammering, and quenching until the fracture is gone, then sliding the blade back into its grip. It's functional, though you'll be the first to admit it's not pretty. The spears are next. Most just need their tips straightened and sharpened. You secure one in the vise and bend it gently back into alignment, the metal creaking in quiet protest. Another needs its socket reforged to fit the shaft properly. That means heating it until the socket opens slightly, then reforming it around a wooden dowel so it will grip the spear shaft tightly. The smell of scorched wood mingles with the charcoal, sharp and a little bitter. The shields are the last and most stubborn. One bears a dent so deep it's practically a bowl. You heat the metal rim and work from the edges inward, tapping and rotating until the curve is restored. It's tedious, but there's a strange satisfaction in watching something broken regain its shape. Outside, the village has gone dark, the only light now spilling from your forge and a few distant windows. The rhythmic sound of your hammer feels louder in the quiet, echoing off the stone walls. You wonder if anyone passing by imagines you're working on something heroic, like a king's sword, instead of mending the same spears that will probably be back here in a month. By midnight, your arms are jelly and your apron is streaked with sweat, soot, and metal filings. You line up the finished weapons and shields along the wall, each one cleaned, repaired, and ready for another round. There's no glory in this work, no cheers, no songs, but tomorrow, when the guard collects them, you'll see the faint relief in his eyes. That's enough. You bank the fire, letting the coals glow low and lazy. The quiet after a rush like this is always strange, like stepping off a spinning wheel. You sit for a moment, the smell of hot iron still clinging to you, and flex your hands. They're tired but steady, capable. Tomorrow you'll return to the usual rhythm of nails, hinges, and market day repairs. But tonight you've kept the Lord's Guard armed and ready. Somewhere out there a patrol will walk the village's edge under the moonlight, and the tools in their hands will hold because you made them hold. You're halfway through shaping a small latch when the day decides to test your patience. The hammer feels good in your grip, the metal on the anvil glowing just the right shade of orange when, crack, something shifts wrong. The blow lands, but the impact feels off, and suddenly your arm follows through into empty air. You look down to see the hammerhead lying on the floor, the wooden handle in your hand as useless as a ladle in a sword fight. You mutter something under your breath that wouldn't make it into a priest's sermon. The hammerhead has rolled just far enough to be annoying, sitting there smugly like it knows it's ruined your momentum. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths regularly replaced their own hammer handles or relied on specialized handle makers. In your case, there's no argument. You'll be the one fixing it, and you'll be doing it now. You bend down to pick up the head, its weight a reminder of why this kind of accident can turn ugly. If it had flown in another direction, it could have smashed a window, or worse, someone's face. You've heard stories of smiths losing teeth, getting concussions, or sending their tools straight into the quench tub. A quirky tidbit from an old journeyman still sticks in your mind. Always check your hammer before the day's first strike. Wood dries, metal loosens, and gravity hates you. You should have listened to him. The handle itself has split near the base, a jagged break that makes it impossible to reuse. You set it aside and rummage through the woodpile for a blank, straight-grained ash or hickory if you've got it. You find a piece that's close enough and clamp it in the vise. The drawn knife shaves long curls from the wood, each pass shaping it closer to the oval profile your hand knows so well. It's slow work, but you've done it enough times to know exactly how it should feel when it's right. Once the haping is done, you heat the hammerhead slightly, not enough to expand it dramatically, but enough to help it settle onto the wood. You slide the new handle in, tapping the butt gently until the fit is snug. A wedge goes in next, hammered into the top of the handle to spread the wood and lock it tight inside the eye of the hammer. You test the grip, giving it a few soft swings. No wobble. Better than before, even. With the hammer fixed, you return to your work, but it's not the only betrayal the day has in store. The tongs you've been using start to squeak, an unpleasant metallic sound that means the rivet is wearing thin. You set the latch aside and take a closer look. The jaws are still aligned, but the rivet hole has worn to the point where the movement feels loose. You could replace the rivet now, but the fire is still hot and the latch is only half done, so you make a mental note to repair the tongs before they drop something molten in your lap. You've learned the hard way that waiting too long turns a fix into a replace. Back at the anvil, you find your rhythm again. The latch takes shape under your hammer, edges trued, curves smoothed. You glance at the repaired hammer and can't help but feel a small swell of pride. Tools may betray you, but they also give you the chance to make them better. That's a quiet kind of satisfaction, one you don't get from perfect days where nothing goes wrong. There's a superstition some smiths whisper about. If a tool fails during an important job, it's trying to warn you about the work itself. Maybe the iron's flawed, maybe the order's cursed. You've never put much stock in that, but when you look at the latch you were working on, you notice a faint crack near the hinge point. Could have been a coincidence, or maybe your hammer knew before you did. Either way, you start again with a new piece. By the time the latch is finished, the sun is lower in the sky, streaking the forge with long shadows. You take a moment to oil the new hammer handle, rubbing it until the grain shines. The tongs get their turn too. You heat a small rivet, slot it through and peen it tight with light, careful taps. The squeak is gone, replaced by the smooth, familiar clink of metal jaws meeting. You hang the tools back in their spots, feeling like you've restored some small balance to the forge. The fire crackles softly, the air is warm with the scent of oiled wood and cooling iron, and your hands, though tired, are steady. The day may have started with a betrayal, but you've ended it with 2 tools better than they were before, and in a trade where you're only as good as what you hold, that's no small victory. Heat rolls off the hearth in shimmering waves, and today it feels like the forge has decided to become a small, enthusiastic volcano. The air is thick, syrupy, the kind you could almost pour into a cup if you were into drinking misery. You push open the door to snag a sliver of breeze, but outside the street is bright and breathless, sun hammering the cobbles with its own invisible mallet. Inside, you're working under 2 suns, the one in the sky and the one you stoke with charcoal and stubbornness. You tell yourself this is character building. Your character complains, lies down, and pretends to faint for dramatic effect. You pump the bellows anyway. The leather wheezes like an old hound, and the fire puffs up with that greedy whoomp you feel in your eyebrows. Sweat runs past your temples, trickling into your ears in sneaky little rivulets. The anvil's face is hot to the touch. Don't touch it. You did that once, and the handles of the tongs have warmed enough that you wrap a rag around them like a napkin on a too-hot mug. Even your apron carries heat, the thick hide oak smoked to a rich scent that would be cozy in winter and is wildly inconsiderate in July. You take inventory of your body like a careful steward. Tongue dry, legs wobbly, arms made of overcooked noodles, brain currently a soft scramble. You know the signs. Dizziness sneaks up first, then that slow thinking that makes a simple cut feel like long division. You fish the clay cup from its hook, fill it from the covered bucket, and drink. The water is cool because you buried the bucket half in the dirt floor near the door, shady and damp, a trick a travelling potter taught you. Mainstream fact for the night, lots of medieval folk chose small beer or weak ale for daily hydration since boiling the wort made it safer than some water sources. You use both, alternating because you'd like to finish the nail. Order with the same number of fingers you started with. You set a bar in the coals and lean against the post, letting the shade of the doorway smear across your face. The street hums in heat-distorted hush, a donkey flicking its ears, a cart's axle complaining. There's the soft slop of someone turning a bucket at the well, and you imagine dunking your head in it like a misguided goose. The iron goes red too quickly. Summer steals patience from both people and metal, and you bring it out to the anvil, determined to work fast but not sloppy. Lift, strike, rotate. The hammer rebounds politely, then grudgingly, then not at all as the bar cools faster than your temper. Back into the fire. You pump the bellows with a rhythm you can keep even when you're lightheaded. 2 short pulls, 1 long push. Your shirt sticks, your hair sticks, even your thoughts stick. You remember the journeyman's advice for days like this. If your sweat is stinging your eyes, salt your water. You've tried it, just a pinch. It helps. Your face stops feeling like you've washed it with brine and regret. There's a fringe tidbit you half believe, half treasure on days like this. Some smiths swore by hanging a damp wreath of mint or willow over the forge mouth to sweeten the heat. You tried it once and the shop smelled like herbal stew, which was pleasant right up until the leaves crisped into ash. Still, a sprig of mint in the water makes drinking feel like a tiny festival, so you've been known to toss one in and pretend you're rich. You pace yourself, carving the workday into shaded islands, a dozen nails, a mouthful of water, a hinge tongue drawn out, a pause by the door jamb, cheek pressed to the cool wood, like it's a lover with excellent timing. You refill the quench tub and notice the steam rising when a tool dips in, even the water is sulking. The light outside has that white-hot colour that makes edges seem cruel. You consider hanging a cloth across the door, wetted down, to pull a little heat from the air as it passes. Poor person's breeze. You do it, and it helps enough that you feel clever for 4 whole minutes. Historians still argue whether craft guilds and local bylaws in various towns restricted summer forge hours for safety or merely for noise and fire risk. Whatever the paperwork once said, the truth in your bones is simpler. You learn to step back before the world tilts. You stop mid-heat once, twice, 3 times, cursing your caution until you remember last summer's apprentice who refused to stop and took a nap on the floor without asking permission. The master was kind. He shoved the boy's feet away from the hearth before finishing the heat. The lesson stuck better than the boy's courage. A woman from the market door peeks in, holding up a broken sickle and a jar the colour of amber. "Syrup of barley," she says. "Weak ale with honey," and you trade a quick repair for a cup. It tastes faintly of grass and sunshine and the idea of better decisions. You mend the sickle's edge, quick and neat, then take a long swallow. The lady says her grandmother called this cool stomach beer, swearing it chases the heat from the inside. You nod with the reverence a hot person gives any theory that ends with a drink. Back to work. The anvil sings brighter when the hammer face is crisp and your stance is right. Today it answers with a duller note, the sound of caution and conserved strength. You either rebound, letting physics pick up some of the load. A tiny joke pops into your head. Work smarter, not hotter, and you chuckle alone like you've just entertained a very exclusive audience of one. You keep the strokes clean, the goals small. Draw this taper, punch this hole, stop before the black sparkles start at the edges of your vision. You think of summer tricks that are almost rituals now. Keep the quench bucket lidded so it stays cool. Park the water at the floor where it's coldest. Swap to the lighter hammer on the hottest hour. Lay damp sand on the floor under the hearth to tame the roaring dust. You lift your apron and fan your face once, which does absolutely nothing but makes you feel proactive. You place the next heat carefully, not in the hottest eye of the fire, but slightly off, so the bar warms evenly without jumping straight to yellow-white enthusiasm, the colour of ruin. Somewhere between one hinge leaf and the next you drift. Not in a dangerous way, your hands still know their job, but in that soft-edged, floaty summer way, thoughts melting into each other like wax. You picture the Lord's men, wrapped in the very plates you planished last week, and instantly feel sorry for their shoulders. You picture the poor horse under its leather barding and give the farrier a mental salute. You picture yourself as a lizard on a warm rock, which is unfair to the lizard because it probably has shade. You take another drink and remember a village superstition. On the worst days, smiths would chalk a sign, something like a little spiral, above the door to lead the heat back into the sky. You've laughed at it, but there's chalk on the shelf and, well, the sky looks big enough to share. You draw a quick spiral, simple as a snail shell, and the act alone feels cooling, as if permission to slow down is now posted in writing. The day softens by increments. You notice it not in the light, which still glares, but in the sound. The streets buzz, dropping a pitch. The baker's oven door clapping shut for the last time. The bees outside lowering their argument with the daisies. You bank the fire just a bit, keeping a hot core, but letting the edges slump. Your final job is an iron hook. Simple and kind. The sort of object that rewards calm hands. You heat the bar to orange, draw a neat taper, and carry it to the horn. The curve comes in one practiced glide, overbent slightly to account for springback, a quick flip, a tiny return curl, and the hook looks like it wants to hold a lantern immediately. You quench it slowly, nose above the steam, breathing through the faint sweetness of charcoal and iron. Your heartbeat, which has been tap dancing since morning, finally begins to count slower. You wipe your brow, and this time your skin feels like skin again, not a medium rare steak. You step to the doorway and stand where sun meets shade, letting the day's furnace give way to evening's long exhale. Tomorrow will be hot as well. The summer is generous that way, but you've mapped the territory. Salted water, small goals, shaded islands, the humility to stop before the room starts shimmering sideways. You hang the new hook by the door, a little badge of the day's truce with the heat, and decide to leave the chalk spiral up. Maybe it does nothing. Maybe it helps. Maybe it just makes you. You smile on your way in. Whatever the truth, you'll take it. You close the door half-latched, and the forge sighs, a tired animal curling in its den, promising it will roar again when you're ready. The forge door groans open to a world so different from yesterday it might as well belong to another country. Gone is the suffocating heat. Today, the cold hits you first, a stiff winter wind slipping through the gap in the door and nosing straight into your sleeves. It finds every seam, every threadbare patch, and fills it with the sort of chill that makes your knuckles ache before you even touch the hammer. The hearth is dark and sulking, a pile of yesterday's ashes with no warmth left in them. You banked it well last night, but the frost crept in anyway. A quick rake through the ash confirms it, dead, which means you'll be coaxing life from flint and tinder before you even think about iron. You strike the steel, sparks bouncing like little golden fleas, finally catching in the dry shavings you saved from summer's carpentry jobs. They smoulder, then flare, and soon the charcoal is swallowing them in small, greedy breaths. Cold makes you impatient, but the fire demands patience now. You feed it bit by bit, watching the bed of coals deepen from dull to lively red. Meanwhile, your tools are suffering. The tongs bite your palm with icy teeth. The hammer's grip feels like grabbing a frozen fish. You wrap your fingers around them anyway, flexing until the stiffness gives way to reluctant movement. A fact worth remembering: in the cold, iron itself becomes less forgiving. Historians still argue whether smiths in northern climates altered their winter work pace for fear of brittleness, but you've felt it firsthand. A rushed strike can turn a good piece into a cracked mess. Your first job is a hinge repair. Simple enough, but the iron's frozen through, and it takes longer to coax it into the warm glow you need for shaping. The bellows groan differently in winter, slower, more resistant, as if the cold stiffens their leather lungs. You can feel the draft stealing heat every time. You step away from the hearth. You slide the hinge leaf onto the anvil and start tapping it back into shape. The blows sound sharper in the cold, a higher-pitched ring that echoes off the stone walls. A tiny flake of frost clings stubbornly to the hinge's edge, hissing away when your hammer finds it. You smile at the small victory, then quickly tuck your fingers back under your arms for warmth. There's a quirky tidbit you remember from an old blacksmith in a mountain village. He swore by keeping a flat stone on the hearth, not for tools, but for warming his boots between jobs. You try it, sliding a couple of cobbles close to the fire. Before long, you're standing on them, letting the heat seep up through the soles and into your toes. Not elegant, but effective. The second task of the day is more stubborn, a ploughshare tip brought in by a farmer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but trudging through frost. The edge is worn, almost dull enough to qualify as a butter knife. You heat it slowly, working the fire harder than you would in summer just to keep the temperature steady. Every time you pull it out, steam hisses from the moisture it's picked up from the air, a visible reminder that winter has its own rules. Hammering in this weather takes twice the effort. The metal resists until it hits that narrow window between too cold to move and too hot to hold shape. And you, of course, are resisting the urge to stick your hands directly into the coals. The The forge's warmth is intoxicating, but lean too close and you'll scorch your eyebrows, something you've already done once this year. Mid-morning, your breath is visible in the air, inside the forge. You pause, watching it puff out in small clouds as you shape the plow tip's edge. It's an odd sight, fire roaring at your side while you can still see your own breath. Outside, the street sounds are muffled, as if the cold has draped everything in thick cloth. Historians still debate whether medieval smiths closed up shop entirely on the harshest days or simply layered on more clothing. Here, you do what you must, keep moving. You find yourself inventing little errands, fetching coal, adjusting tools, just to keep your blood from settling into stillness. By midday, you've fallen into a rhythm: heat, hammer, warm your hands, repeat. You've also learned to keep the smaller work pieces in a covered basket near the fire so they don't freeze while they wait their turn. A local superstition says never to leave an unfinished piece in the open air overnight in winter. It catches the frost and will never take a proper temper. You don't know if that's true, but it costs nothing to keep them by the hearth, so you do. The last job before dusk is a set of nails for a carpenter repairing a roof beam cracked by ice. The work is familiar enough that your body moves without much thought, the hammer finding its rhythm even as your breath continues to cloud the air. Outside, the light is already draining from the sky, winter's early curtain call sending long blue shadows across the shop floor. When you finally bank the fire, you stand a little longer than necessary by the coals, soaking in the last of the day's warmth. You pull your cloak around your shoulders before stepping into the chill, tools put away, hearth settling into a quiet glow. The cold bites again the moment you step outside, but the memory of the forge's heat lingers in your hands, a kind of invisible armor against the night. The morning begins with a pile of broken promises, metal ones, scattered across your workbench like the aftermath of a brawl. Blades snapped at the tang, nails bent from careless strikes, a hinge so twisted it looks more like a piece of abstract art than anything that once held a door. Repairs day. You can tell by the way the pile leans, a precarious tower of things that used to work. You start with the most urgent. A broken sword belonging to a farmer who swears it's been in his family for 3 generations. The blade's tip is missing, sheared off clean in a way that suggests a hard, unlucky block. Into the fire it goes, the coals swallowing it with a soft hiss. You watch the steel change from grey to deep red, then to orange, the colours creeping along the length like sunrise. Historians still argue whether village smiths spent more time making new tools or repairing old ones. But in your shop, repairs win by a landslide. New pieces are satisfying, sure, but repairs tell stories. Every dent and warp is a line in a tale only the owner can finish, and some of those stories are worth hearing, like how this sword met its end in a wrestling match with a stubborn tree root. Once the blade is hot, you work the broken edge, squaring it off before you draw it out into a new point. It's delicate work. You need to blend the new metal into the old without leaving a weak seam. The hammer rings bright, and the vibration buzzes in your fingertips. You pause now and then to brush away the scale, revealing clean steel beneath. While the sword cools, you turn to a more humble job, reforging a batch of bent nails. A carpenter has dropped them off in a bucket, muttering something about helping hands who don't know the difference between straight and crooked. You reheat them in groups, tapping each one back into line on the anvil's step. It's rhythmic, almost soothing. Lift, tap, roll. Tap, until your arm starts to feel the steady thrum of repetition. A quirky tidbit you recall while working. Some smiths kept a separate bucket for lucky scrap, broken bits of iron said to carry good fortune if worked into a new piece. You've got one too, though it's less about luck and more about not wasting good material. A chunk of bent hinge might become a latch, a snapped chisel could live again as a short punch. Next on the pile is a warped sickle. The curve's all wrong, making it useless for cleanly cutting grain. You heat it gently, setting it against the anvil's horn to coax it back into its proper shape. The metal resists at first as if it remembers the way it bent and prefers it that way. You remind it firmly of its original purpose. Then comes the stubborn one, a small cauldron handle, broken at one end where the loop meets the pot. You drill out the rivet remnant, heat a new loop, and fit it to match the old. Re-riveting it is trickier than you expect. The cauldron's bulk makes it awkward to maneuver. You mutter to yourself, which is apparently the signal for the journeyman to stroll in and smirk. He offers no help, only the ever-useful advice: don't drop it. The afternoon settles into the familiar back and forth of repair work. Heat, shape, cool, repeat. You start to notice the different voices of the metal, the sharp ring of a blade, the duller thunk of a hinge, the hollow clink of thin sheet. It's a kind of language, one you've learned by repetition rather than study. Historians still debate whether medieval smiths considered repair work as prestigious as new forging. Judging by the pride you feel when a battered piece leaves your shop looking whole again, the answer for you is yes. Repairs may not bring glory, but they bring trust. People remember the smith who saved their grandfather's knife or mended the clasp on their family chest. As the light begins to fade, you finish the last piece, a gate latch whose spring had snapped. You'd cut a new one from strip stock, curled it to match, and quenched it carefully to give it the right flex. When you fit it back into place, the latch clicks closed with a satisfying snap. That sound, clean, crisp and final, feels like the true end of the day. You bank the fire low, sweep the floor, and stack the repaired items neatly for collection. The sword gleams faintly in the fading light. The sickle's curve is true again, and the gate latch is ready to keep the night wind out. You look at the empty workbench, knowing it won't stay that way for long. Tomorrow will bring another pile of broken promises, and you'll set about keeping them again, one strike at a time. By now, the scent of the forge has woven itself into your very being. It clings to you like a loyal dog. Charcoal smoke, hot metal, and that faint tang of iron dust. Even on your day off, you catch a whiff in your hair or your clothes and know exactly where it came from. Some people find it comforting. Others wrinkle their noses. For you, it's simply the smell of your trade, your hours, your life. This morning, the smell hits you before the heat does. The fire's already going because the journeyman opened shop early. He's working on a strap hinge, and every strike sends a small puff of charcoal scent through the air. You hang your cloak by the door, breathing in the layers of aroma, smoke at the top, iron in the middle, and the bass note of sweat and leather that settles into the stone walls like a permanent guest. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmith shops had much ventilation beyond a chimney hole and open door. Judging by the way the smoke sometimes swirls stubbornly in here, you're leaning toward not enough. On still days, the air gets heavy, a mix of haze and warmth that turns every breath into a memory of last night's fire. You've learned to pace yourself, keeping a cloth on hand to wipe the soot from your face before it can stick too well. There's a strange comfort in the consistency of it. You can tell the forge is alive by scent alone. The sharper tang when the fire's just been stoked, the almost sweet undertone when steel is hardening in the quench, the faint bitter note of burnt wood when the bellows have been overzealous. It's a language your nose has learned without you realizing. Today's work isn't glamorous. Hooks, a few nails, and a gate latch. But each task feeds the forge's perfume. As you draw out the taper for a hook, the heat sends up that familiar, almost metallic breath that mingles with the smell of scorched scale falling to the floor. You give the piece a neat curl around the horn, and when it hits the quench, the steam rises in a wave of mineral scent that instantly coats the inside of your nose. There's a quirky tidbit you remember from an old smith in the next village over. He claimed the smell of the quench could tell you if the metal was right. Too sharp and it meant the steel was brittle, too mild and it meant it was too soft. You don't know how much truth there is in that, but you catch yourself sniffing the air every time you quench, just in case. By midday, the smell of charcoal has deepened. The bin beside the hearth is half empty, and each new shovelful you toss in releases a dusty, woody aroma that reminds you of summer kilns. You can almost picture the charcoal burners out in the woods, tending their smouldering piles for days until the wood becomes the light, black fuel you rely on. Historians still debate whether smiths burned their own charcoal or bought it from specialists. You know the answer here. Buying is faster, but the cost bites into your earnings. Sometimes in slow seasons you've made your own, standing over a smoky mound for hours and coming away smelling like a campfire that tried to make friends with a chimney. Late in the afternoon, the journeyman starts sharpening a scythe blade on the grindstone. The sound is a steady hiss, and with each pass, a fine mist of water and metal dust rises into the air. The smell is faint but distinct, a kind of wet, metallic tang that settles in your mouth if you stand too close. You step back, letting him work while you oil the tools on the bench. The oil changes the forge's scent entirely. It's animal fat-based with a deep, warm aroma that almost masks the sharper smells of the day. You rub it into hammer handles, tongs, and the anvil's face, watching the sheen spread and catching the faint scent of leather from your gloves. It's a small ritual that ends the day on a softer note. As evening falls, the fire dies down, and the shop's perfume changes again. Without the roar of heat, the scent is cooler, calmer, more wood than flame, more earth than air. You stand in the doorway for a moment, breathing it in. This is the smell that will follow you home, the one that will drift from your clothes when you hang them by the bed. Some people would wash it away as soon as they could. You let it linger. It's proof of the work you've done, the hours you've put in, and the quiet satisfaction that tomorrow the forge will smell like this all over again. You hear him before you see him, boots with too much confidence for this muddy lane, a whistle that pretends it knows harmonies, the squeak of a cart whose wheels need a smith, which is either excellent marketing or pure denial. You glance up from the anvil just as a stranger steps into the doorway, the light behind him turning him into a silhouette with a hat that's had more adventures than sense. He smells faintly of pine smoke and river wind, which is already suspicious because everyone else smells like onions and honest sweat. "Afternoon," he says, tipping the hat. "Mind if a travelling smith warms his toes and borrows your fire?" His voice has that easy road music to it, the kind that makes people hand over stories and lunch in equal measure. Behind him, a small handcart squats under a canvas, and your curiosity perks up like a cat that heard a cupboard open. You wave him in. The forge is hardly a private club, and the fire's big enough for two egos as long as one of them is yours. He wheels the cart in and flips the canvas, and there it is, a mess of tools, some familiar, hammers, tongs, a folding brazier, and some that make your eyebrows try to escape your forehead. There's a small screw vise that looks too precise for its size, a pair of oddly curved tongs with notches like bites, and what might be a spring swage built onto a hinged plate. You feel the polite sting of envy, which you disguise by rubbing your chin as if you're an inspector of mysteries. "Made that one myself," he says, catching your glance at the spring swage. He flicks it open, the jaw halves kiss with a crisp little snap. "Saves a minute on every hinge. Over a year, that's a fortnight of borrowed life." He grins. "Used mine to nap." You answer with a sound that sits exactly between admiration and challenge. This is your house. If he's going to hum while he works, he'll hum in tune with your A's. Envil. Still, you offer the fire, and he thanks you like a man who knows forge etiquette. He pumps the bellows with a practiced rhythm. 2 short pulls, 1 long push, and you have to fight a smile. Your rhythm, the room notices, the way rooms do. He heats a short bar and drops it into his little swage. The hammer sings, sharp and efficient. In a handful of blows, he's drawn a clean, centered groove that would have taken you 3 tools and a muttered hymn. You feel that tiny pinch of pride where it lives near your ribs, the place that hates being outplayed on home stone. You step closer. Neat trick, you say. Looks fussy, breaks easy. He giggles. Actually giggles, which should be illegal in a room full of hammers. Only if you hit it like a door you don't pay rent on. He flips the piece, runs another series, and holds up a hinge leaf with ribs that will seat beautifully. Fine. You hate him a little less. You trade back. You draw out a perfect taper, effortless curve, and finish the return with a flair so neat it could be measured with smugness. His eyebrows lift. That's a pretty curl. You shrug as if your hands didn't rehearse that motion every week for 2 years. A tiny joke occurs to you. You could charge admission and call it the Museum of Polite One-Upmanship. 2 visitors, no refunds. He pulls another wrapped item from the cart, a narrow blade with a skin like watered silk. The pattern ripples in faint waves, light and shadow moving beneath the surface. You've seen blades like this exactly twice, both on men who would not let go of them even to sneeze. Trade fair west of here, he says. Merchant swore it's Damascus. Mayhap Woots, mayhap a very convincing cousin. Mainstream fact to anchor the moment. By the late medieval period, legends of Damascus steel, often made from Indian Woots ingots traded through the Middle East, had reached Europe, and pattern-welded imitations circulated widely. Historians still argue whether village smiths like you ever got your hands on true Woots or mostly worked with locally made steels and pattern-welded lookalikes. You run a thumb near the edge, not on it. You're attached to being attached, and nod. Whatever it is, the smith who made it had steady wrists and a patient soul. He tells you stories while you both work, a duet of sparks, of a river town where the bellows are foot-powered and the smiths keep time like drummers, of a hill village that swears by quenching ploughshares in buttermilk for sweet temper, of a fair farther south where a man sold nails by the poem, 1 sonnet, 20 nails. You almost choke on that one. Your market can barely handle haggling without meter. Then he says the thing that lodges in your head worked a piece of star iron once. You glance up. Travellers bring tales, some tales bring frost. Meteorite, he adds, seeing your look. Black as night, sparks like blue fire, took to the hammer strange, heavy, stubborn, noble. A quirky tidbit, yes, but not unheard of. People call it sky iron, star metal, gifts from heaven that don't ask for thanks and do not enjoy being told what shape to be. You file it away with beer quenching and chalk spirals, oddities that taste like stories and sometimes like truth. He asks to see your tools, and you catch yourself making a tidy parade of them. The rounding hammer with the kind face, the cross-peen with the temper you finally nailed, pun absolutely intended. The wolf-jaw tongs that don't drop anything unless bribed. He picks up the rounding hammer and tests the balance. Good shoulder, he says. You dress your faces yourself, yo. You nod, trying not to preen like a rooster who just learned whistling. He has tools you've dreamed about, and you have quiet habits he doesn't. He watches you read heat by color and sound, how you listen for that change in ring that says now or wait. You watch him switch between tongs without looking, how his left hand anticipates the next position before his right finishes the strike. It's like hearing your language spoken with a different music. Work drifts into friendly trial. He suggests a timed exercise. 2 hinge leaves, matched, only 1 heat each per stage. You accept because of course you do. The fire becomes an umpire. Heat on the anvil, the world narrows. Your hammer finds the rebound sweet spot you mapped in your bones back in section 3, and the plate thins exactly where you sing to it. He's fast, annoyingly so, but you are unflappable, except internally, where small chickens flap. You finish first by a breath. His finish is cleaner by a hair. You call it even, because you are either generous or a coward. Between heats, he talks guilds, and you trade notes. Mainstream fact, in many towns, guilds regulated who could sell what, where, and at what quality, while itinerant craftsmen slipped between the rules in places too small or too practical to care. He shrugs. Some places stamp you, some places feed you, some places remember your name. You feel that in your spine. Your shop remembers your name. Pencil scratches in the wood of long days, the way the anvil's face has a faint bright patch exactly where your favorite work happens. As dusk leans through the door, the journeyman drifts in, pretending he wasn't waiting to see if the stranger would outshine you. He circles once, grunts at the spring swage like a cat inspecting rival furniture, and takes up a broom because that's the forge's version of applause. The three of you work in easy counterpoint, your bellows, his bellows, your bellows, as if the fire itself is clapping politely for both of you. The traveller unwraps one last oddment, a tiny punch with a moon stamped on its crown. "Maker's mark," he says, offering it. "Had two made. One for me, one for the first shop that felt like a friend." You hesitate. Pride is a strong metal. Generosity is stronger when you let it set. You accept and fish in your drawer for the spare flatter you dressed last winter, the face trued like a pond at dawn. "For the road," you say. He tests the face, smiles the smile of someone who knows the worth of flatness. Before he leaves, he asks about your chalk spiral above the door. You glance up, almost embarrassed, then decide to tell the truth. "For heat," you say. "Or for laughing at myself, can't remember." He laughs and draws a matching spiral on his cart handle. "Then let the sky share your summer." That line stays. He rolls his cart out into the blue hour. The hat dips, the whistle returns like a friendly bird. You watch him go, then watch the doorway he's left behind as if the air might explain something. You turn back to the anvil and set your new moonmark punch on the bench where you'll see it every morning. Tonight, your forge feels larger by exactly one cart's worth of horizons. You bank the fire. It purrs like a tired cat. Your hands rest on the anvil a moment longer than needed. You're still you. Same tools, same walls, same stubborn iron. But your rhythm has a new measure tucked inside it now. Tomorrow, you'll try a spring swage of your own. Or maybe you'll just hum his tune while you work and pretend the road is humming back. Either way, you've traded more than tricks. You've traded courage, the small, useful kind that says, "Learn, then swing." You notice it first in the way the master spits over his left shoulder before striking the first blow of the day. He does it without thinking, a little flick of the head, and then the hammer comes down like always. Later, when you ask him about it, he waves you off. "Keeps the bad luck out," he says, as if that's all the explanation the world requires. You've been in the forge long enough to realize there's a whole undercurrent of superstition woven into the work, little rituals, charms, and whispered rules that have nothing to do with physics, but everything to do with how smiths feel about risk. Historians still argue whether these habits were more for the sake of the smith's peace of mind, or if people genuinely believed the forge could be influenced by unseen forces. Either way, in here, the line between craft and magic blurs like heat shimmer over the coals. On the shelf by the door sits a small horseshoe nailed upside down. The master swears it catches the luck before it spills out. The journeyman once told you to never hand a hammer directly to another smith. Always set it down first, because passing steel hand to hand cuts the friendship. You've rolled your eyes at that one, but you've also noticed he never breaks it. Today you're working on a small blade for a farmer's knife when the old woman from the edge of the village appears in the doorway. She's the one who sells herbs and poultices, the one children whisper about, as if she might turn you into a toad for fun. She steps in, eyes the forge, and says, "You should tie a red ribbon to that hammer." You open your mouth to ask why, but she's already explaining, something about the ribbon drawing away, accidents. Quirky tidbit or not, you humour her, digging a scrap of cloth from the rag pile and knotting it to the hammer's neck. The journeyman smirks, but he doesn't take it off. There's a whole set of forge do's and don'ts that you've picked up without even trying. Don't start a big job on a Sunday unless it's for the church. Don't whistle while you pump the bellows. Apparently it calls the wind in a way the fire doesn't like. Always give the anvil a little tap before the first real strike of the day, as if to greet it. Some smiths swear you should never quench a blade on a waning moon, or it will come out brittle. Mainstream fact: in parts of medieval Europe, smiths were often seen as having one foot in the world of the practical and one in the world of the mystical. Their control of fire and transformation of metal seemed close to sorcery for those who didn't understand the process, so charms and rituals easily found their place in the trade. One of your favourite oddities is the iron whisper. When a piece is cooling slowly on the bench, some smiths lean close and speak to it softly. Promises of good work, warnings against warping. You've caught the master doing it more than once, though he claims he's just muttering about the day's orders. You tried it once, telling a stubborn hinge you'd turn it into scrap if it didn't straighten. It did straighten, but you can't decide if that's magic or just good hammering. The forge itself has charms worked into its bones. There's a coin wedged under one leg of the anvil for fortune in every strike, the master says. A tiny cross is scratched into the underside of the bellows board, where only someone replacing the leather would see it. And hanging from the rafters, a loop of twisted iron wire that no one remembers making. The journeyman claims it's a fire snare to keep sparks from catching the roof. Your own addition is small. A pebble from the river, smooth and black, sitting at the base of the quench tub. You found it on a day when every heat went right, every curve bent just so. You've left it there since, not because you think it holds power, but because you like the idea that it might. Late in the afternoon, you're drawing out a bar when a gust from the open door sends a swirl of ashes into the air. The master immediately steps over to the hearth, mutters something you can't catch, and tosses a pinch of salt into the coals. "Drives away trouble," he says, then goes back to work as if nothing happened. The fire crackles differently for a moment. Probably coincidence, but you file it under interesting. There's one debate that never seems to end, whether a smith should leave the forge fire burning overnight. Some say it keeps the forge alive and working smoothly the next day. Others say it invites accidents. Here you compromise. Bank the fire so it sleeps but can be woken with little effort. Sometimes when you open the shop in the morning and see those faint, glowing embers, it does feel like the forge has been keeping watch. As the day winds down, you glance at the ribbon on your hammer, the coin under the anvil, the pebble by the quench. Rationally, you know they're just objects. But in the quiet hum of the cooling forge, you wonder if maybe the rituals aren't for the metal at all. Maybe they're for you, to keep your hands steady, your mind focused, and your work connected to something older than you can name. It starts as nothing, a single spark leaping a little farther than usual, landing in the pile of scrap shavings near the bench. You don't notice right away. Your hammer is busy persuading a stubborn hinge into obedience, but the smell catches you, something sharper than charcoal, like burning straw. You turn and sure enough there's a thin curl of smoke rising from the corner. Your first thought is that you can handle it with a quick stomp. You cross the floor, boot grinding down on the smouldering edge, and for a moment the smoke seems to fade. Then you hear the faint crackle, see the orange ember flare brighter under the pressure. That's when you realize it's not just surface. Heat has wormed its way down into the shavings. You grab the quench bucket, sloshing cold water across the pile. Steam explodes upward, hissing like an angry snake. The journeyman looks up from the bellows with a frown that says he smelled it before you did. "Check the wall," he calls, and your stomach drops. You push aside the pile, revealing the worst-case scenario, a thin line of scorch climbing the baseboard toward the timber post. It's faint now, but if it catches, the whole place will go in minutes. Historians still argue whether medieval forges were more prone to catastrophic fires than other workshops. Given the open flames, flying sparks, and wooden frames, you'd say the answer is obvious. The next minutes are a blur. You drag the scrap away from the wall, sloshing water until the wood stops sizzling. The journeyman shovels fresh sand from the bin, dumping it in a heavy layer over the area. Sand smothers better than water when embers hide in the cracks, a trick passed down from smith to smith for generations. Quirky tidbit: some old shops even kept barrels of beer near the forge for emergencies, cheap ale doubled as drink and, in a pinch, fire suppressant. You'd rather keep yours in the salmon mug. The master arrives mid-chaos, drawn by the smell and the sound of your boots scraping the floor. He doesn't shout, he's too busy checking the rafters for stray smoke. "We're lucky," he mutters, and you know he means it. A moment slower, a bit more wind through the open door, and you'd be watching your livelihood vanish in black smoke. Once the fire's dead and the floor swept clean, you feel the tremor in your hands. Adrenaline burns hot and leaves you shaky after. The master claps you on the shoulder, hard enough to jolt you. "Keep the sand close, and don't let shavings pile near the wall." He says it like it's a lesson, not a scolding, and you nod because he's right. The journeyman, of course, can't resist adding his own wisdom. "Sparks have legs," he says with a smirk, as if that explains everything. You roll your eyes, but you also glance around the floor, noticing every loose curl of iron, scale, and wood scrap like they're small conspirators. After the excitement, the forge feels different, quieter, more watchful. The smell of wet ash lingers in the air, heavy and damp. You stoke the fire back to life carefully, keeping the workspace clear, every tool in its place. The work resumes, slowly at first, then with the steady rhythm you know so well. By late afternoon, the day has almost forgotten its scare. The hinge you were working on is finished, edges smooth and holes clean. The journeyman is polishing a blade, the master fitting a new handle to a hammer. But every so often you catch someone glancing toward that corner, checking for smoke that isn't there. There's an old superstition about a forge fire that almost escapes. It's said to remember the path it took, and will try again unless you change something. The master shifts the scrap bin to the other side of the shop. You don't argue. Maybe the superstition's true, maybe it's just sense, but either way, the fire has a new corner to dream about, and that's fine by you. When the sun dips and you bank the coals for the night, you take one last look at the sanded floor. The scorched mark faint but still there. A reminder, small and dark, that the forge isn't just your partner, it's a partner with teeth, and every once in a while it likes to remind you. Evening has a way of making the forge feel smaller, the shadows stretching long over the floor, while the fire throws gold against the walls. You've spent the whole day turning out small orders, nails, hooks, and 2 hinges, so the bench is lined with finished work. Now comes the part that feels less like smithing and more like arithmetic, counting what you've earned and what you still owe. You clear a space on the bench, push the tongs and hammer aside, and tip your leather pouch out. Coins clink onto the wood in an uneven scatter, some bright silver, most of them copper, and a few odd bits of foreign coinage that came from travelling merchants. The sound is satisfying, but the sight is less so. You've been here before, plenty of pieces sold, yet the pile never looks quite as large as it felt in your pocket. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths earned a steady income or lived in a constant cycle of feast and famine. Standing here, counting each coin with care, you know the truth sits somewhere in the middle. A good week means you can replace worn tools, buy better charcoal, maybe even set a little aside. A slow week means patching tongs instead of buying new and hoping no one's plough breaks before you can afford fresh stock. You sort the coins into neat stacks. Coppers for daily expenses, silver for supplies. The bright foreign coin from market day sits in a separate pile, more curiosity than currency until you can trade it. Each stack represents hours of hammering, days of sweat, and moments where you convinced someone that your work was worth just a little more than they planned to spend. Next to the coins is a list scrawled on scrap parchment. Debts owed to the charcoal burner, payment for the leather worker who stitched a new apron strap, a small sum set aside for the tanner's boy who runs errands. You cross off what you can pay now, mark the rest with a fat round, and mentally add more nails to tomorrow's plan. There's a quirky tidbit you remember from another smith. He used to hide one coin from every day's earnings in a secret pocket sewn into his apron. By year's end, he claimed it was enough to buy a feast or a new tool outright. You've tried it in fits and starts, though more often than not, that hidden coin finds its way into the day's spending before the week is out. You pause to look around the shop, taking stock in a different way. The tools are in good shape, the fire burns steady, and the scrap bin is full enough to promise material for smaller projects. But the wall where you hang finished work is bare again, everything sold or delivered. It's a good problem, but also a reminder that tomorrow you'll need to start filling it back up. The journeyman comes in from the back room wiping his hands on a rag. He glances at your coin stacks, then at the list, and raises an eyebrow. "We are solvent?" he asks, half a grin on his face. You nod. "Barely," you admit, sliding the coppers into their pouch. He chuckles, then drops 2 more coins on the table. Payment from a late pickup you'd forgotten about. Small, but enough to ease the tightness in your chest. As the light outside dims to blue, you lock the day's earnings in the small chest under the bench. The key is heavy in your hand for something so small, and you slip it into your pocket before banking the fire. The room grows quieter without the constant clang of work, the fire's glow settling into a gentle pulse. Historians might not care about the exact balance of a smith's books on a Thursday evening, but you know it matters. The rhythm of earning and spending is as much a part of the craft as hammer and tongs. Some days you're ahead, some days you're behind, but the work never really stops because every coin, every hinge, every nail is just another step toward the next order, the next meal, the next day at the forge. You hang your apron by the door, feeling the weight of the day in your shoulders. Tomorrow will bring more metal, more heat, more coin to count. Tonight, you'll sleep knowing the forge is stocked, the debts are manageable, and the fire will be ready to greet you again in the morning. The forge is quiet now, except for the faint pop of a settling ember. You stand over the anvil with one last piece of work, a simple strap hinge. Nothing grand, nothing tricky, just a clean, functional bit of iron to close out the day. The bar lies across the anvil's face, still warm from its final heat. You grip the hammer, raise it, and let it fall in a smooth arc. The sound rings bright and clear in the dimming light, a note that seems to linger a heartbeat longer than usual. Your arms are tired in that pleasant, heavy way that says you've earned your rest. Each swing feels deliberate, not rushed. Lift, strike, breathe. The hinge's edges are already straight. You're just coaxing it into its final shape, making sure it's square and true before the quench. The fire is down to a glowing heart now, the shadows in the corners stretching like lazy cats. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths always finished a day with a small piece of work to cool down after heavier tasks, or if it's just something passed along as tradition. For you, it's both, a habit that settles your mind and your hands, letting the noise of the day fade into something steady. You brush away the scale, watching it flake off like bits of black snow. The smell of cooling metal rises, mingling with the faint sweetness of dying charcoal. You remember a quirky tidbit from an old traveling smith who swore that if you whispered your name to the last piece you forged before sleep, it would remember you and work better for its owner. You murmur it quietly, half for the tradition, half for the rhythm of the moment. The final curve comes together with a few gentle taps. You lift the hinge, check its lines, then dunk it into the quench. The hiss is soft like rain on distant stone, steam curling up into the lamplight. When it's cool, you set it with the others on the bench. Today's small gallery of us, effortless, each piece headed to some door, chest, or cart in the village. The fire sighs as you close the bellows and bank the coals. Tools are hung back in their places, the floor swept clean, the quench tub covered. You take one last slow look around the shop, walls darkened by years of smoke, anvil gleaming faintly, the faint spiral of chalk still above the door. It all feels quieter now, as if the forge itself is easing into rest. Outside, the village has gone still. A few distant voices drift on the air, but mostly it's the sound of night, soft wind, the rustle of leaves, a dog barking once and then settling down. You hang your apron, stretch the stiffness from your shoulders, and let the cool air hit your face. The last hammer swing of the day still hums faintly in your muscles. You know that tomorrow it will begin again, iron, fire, and the steady rhythm that shapes both. But for now, you close the door behind you, leaving the forge in the gentle company of its own warmth. The wind down begins almost without you noticing. The streets are darker now, the glow from windows soft and golden. Your steps are slower, your breathing deep and even, the kind that makes your thoughts stretch out into longer, calmer lines. You picture the forge as you left it, fire banked, tools resting, the air still holding a trace of warm charcoal. That image settles over you like a blanket. In your mind, you're still there, leaning on the anvil, the metal cooling under your hands. The sound of the last strike is a low echo now, fading into the quiet. The smell of the forge becomes softer, less sharp, like smoke drifting higher into the night air. Every movement slows, the swing of the hammer, the curl of the steam, until it all feels distant and safe. You let the warmth of the day's work stay in your arms and shoulders while the rest of you begins to drift. The light in the forge grows dimmer in your mind's eye, the glow of the coals fading to a faint ember, steady but gentle. The door is closed, the night air cool, and the world outside is quiet. You take one last slow breath, letting the calm settle in like the forge settling into its own sleep. The rhythm of the day is gone now, replaced by stillness. The tools rest, the fire rests, and so do you. Sweet dreams.